Behind the golden gates of Buckingham Palace, where centuries of tradition meet modern ambition, a quiet war was brewing. The public saw polite smiles and coordinated appearances, but those close to the royal family knew the truth. Two women, both married into the House of Windsor, were locked in a battle that would determine the future of the monarchy itself. Queen Camilla, once the most hated woman in Britain, had spent decades rebuilding her reputation and securing her position. Now, with her husband King Charles III on the throne, she wielded unprecedented influence. But standing in her way was Catherine, Princess of Wales, beloved by the public, and married to the future king. What started as subtle disagreements over protocol and influence had escalated into something far more dangerous. When Camilla made her move to diminish Kate's role in the royal family, she underestimated one crucial factor: Prince William's fierce protection of his wife and his vision for the crown's future. The heir to the throne would not stand idly by while his stepmother attempted to sideline the woman he loved and the mother of his children. This is the untold story of a royal power struggle that threatened to tear apart the very fabric of the British monarchy. It's a tale of ambition, loyalty, betrayal, and the lengths people will go to protect their legacy. In the corridors of power, where every gesture is calculated and every word carries weight, three royals would clash in a battle that would reshape the crown forever. The stakes couldn't be higher. The future of a 1,000-year-old institution hung in the balance, and only one vision for the monarchy would survive. The morning fog hung thick over Windsor Castle as Queen Camilla stepped out of her Bentley, her expression carefully composed despite the storm brewing within. It was early October 2024, and the leaves were beginning their autumn transformation, much like the monarchy itself was about to undergo a dramatic change. She had requested this private meeting with her senior staff, away from the prying eyes of Buckingham Palace, where every conversation seemed to echo through the halls and find its way to unwelcome ears. Sir Reginald Hartwell, Camilla's private secretary for the past 8 years, stood waiting in the oak-paneled study. A man in his 60s with silver hair and an impeccable understanding of royal protocol, he had served the queen consort faithfully through her most challenging periods. Today, however, even his usually unflappable demeanor showed signs of concern. "Your Majesty," Reginald began, bowing slightly as Camilla entered the room. The space was intimate compared to the grand halls of Buckingham Palace, filled with personal photographs and mementos that told the story of her long journey from royal mistress to queen consort. "I've prepared the briefing you requested regarding the Princess of Wales's increasing influence." Camilla settled into her preferred armchair, the one positioned perfectly to catch the morning light streaming through the diamond-paned windows. She had learned long ago that perception was everything in royal circles, and even the way light fell across her face could influence how others received her words. "Please continue," she said, her voice carrying the authority that had taken decades to cultivate. Reginald opened a leather portfolio, revealing carefully organized documents and newspaper clippings. "Ma'am, the public approval ratings continue to favor the Princess of Wales significantly. Her recent solo engagements have received overwhelming positive coverage, particularly her work with early childhood development and mental health initiatives. The Palace Communications team reports that her social media presence generates 3 times the engagement of other royal accounts." The queen consort's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. These weren't just numbers on a page. They represented a shift in public affection that threatened everything she had worked to build. When she had married Charles in 2005, the British public had been openly hostile. The ghost of Diana still haunted every public appearance, every photograph, every attempt at royal duty. It had taken nearly 2 decades of careful image management, charitable work, and strategic public relations to transform herself from the woman who had allegedly destroyed a fairy tale marriage into a respected member of the royal family. "What about her role in upcoming state functions?" Camilla asked, though she already suspected the answer would displease her. "The princess has been invited to take a more prominent role in the state visit from the Emperor of Japan next month. The Foreign Office specifically requested her involvement, citing her ability to connect with younger international audiences. Reginald paused, knowing his next words would sting. They've also suggested she lead the cultural exchange portion of the visit, which traditionally would fall under your purview as Queen Consort. Camilla rose from her chair and moved to the window, gazing out at the perfectly manicured gardens where peacocks strutted across the lawn with the same regal bearing she had fought so hard to achieve. The irony wasn't lost on her that these beautiful birds were also known for their fierce territorial behavior. "And what does Prince William think of his wife's expanding role?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. William had always been protective of Kate, perhaps even more so since becoming heir apparent. He had watched his mother's struggles with the institution and was determined to ensure his wife's experience would be different. The Prince of Wales is naturally very supportive. Our sources indicate he's been actively advocating for the princess to take on more significant responsibilities. He believes her popularity could help modernize the monarchy's image and secure its future relevance. Reginald's diplomatic language couldn't mask the underlying message. William saw his wife as the future of the crown, and Camilla's traditional approach as potentially outdated. The Queen Consort turned back to face her private secretary, her expression now hardened with resolve. "Reginald, I've spent the better part of 20 years earning my place in this family and this institution. I won't stand by and watch everything I've built be overshadowed by someone who has had the luxury of public adoration from day one." She moved to her desk, where a silver-framed photograph showed her with King Charles on their coronation day. The image captured a moment of triumph she had never imagined possible during those dark years when the public had jeered at her every appearance. "Catherine is undoubtedly charming and well-suited to royal life," Camilla continued, her tone measured but firm. "However, there's a significant difference between being popular and understanding the true weight of royal responsibility." Reginald nodded, though his expression suggested some discomfort with the direction of the conversation. "What would you like me to prepare, Your Majesty?" Camilla returned to her chair, leaning forward slightly as she spoke. "I want you to arrange a meeting with the Archbishop of Canterbury. It's time we discuss the historical precedents of the Queen Consort's role in state functions. I also want you to contact the Lord Chamberlain's office about reviewing the allocation of royal patronages. Some of Catherine's newer charitable affiliations might be better suited to working royals with more experience." The private secretary made notes, though his pen moved with less enthusiasm than usual. "Ma'am, if I may speak frankly, any perceived attempt to diminish the Princess of Wales's role could be poorly received by the public and the press." Camilla's smile was thin but determined. "That's precisely why it must be handled delicately. This isn't about diminishing anyone's role, Reginald. It's about ensuring proper protocol is followed and that royal duties are distributed according to experience and constitutional precedents. The Queen Consort holds a specific position in the hierarchy that has been established for centuries." She stood again, this time moving to a bookshelf lined with volumes on royal history and constitutional law. Her fingers traced the spine of a particularly worn book about Queen Mary, King George V consort, who had been known for her fierce protection of royal protocol and her family's position. The monarchy has survived for over 1,000 years because it maintains certain standards and hierarchies. Popular opinion is important, but it cannot be allowed to override constitutional propriety. Reginald finished his notes and looked up at the Queen Consort. "Shall I also prepare briefings on historical precedents for Queen Consorts leading state functions?" "Yes, and I want examples from successful Queen Consorts who maintain their authority even when younger royals gain public attention." Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, managed to remain influential and respected throughout her long life, despite the popularity of younger family members. There are lessons to be learned from her approach. As if on cue, Camilla's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at the screen, and her expression darkened slightly. It was a news alert about Catherine's latest public appearance, which had generated thousands of positive comments on social media within hours of the photos being published. "The princess has a natural gift for public relations," Camilla admitted, though her tone suggested she viewed this as much a challenge as an asset. However, natural gifts must be balanced with institutional knowledge and respect for established protocols. Reginald gathered his materials, sensing that the meeting was drawing to a close. "I'll begin working on these initiatives immediately, Your Majesty. When would you like the first briefings prepared?" "Within the week." "And Reginald?" Camilla's voice carried a warning edge that her private secretary recognized from their most sensitive previous discussions. "These conversations remain strictly confidential. The success of any adjustments to royal protocols depends entirely on discretion." After Reginald left, Camilla remained in the study, contemplating the chess game she was about to begin. She had learned through hard experience that in royal circles, power wasn't simply inherited or assigned. It had to be continuously earned and protected. Catherine might have natural charisma and public approval, but Camilla had something equally valuable: decades of experience navigating the treacherous waters of royal politics. She thought about King Charles, her husband of nearly 20 years, and how he would react to her plans. He had always been caught between his loyalty to her and his desire to maintain family harmony. But Charles also understood the importance of institutional stability and proper protocol. He had waited over 70 years to become king. He wouldn't want his reign marked by constitutional confusion or blurred lines of authority. The queen consort moved to her computer and began drafting a carefully worded email to the Lord Chamberlain's office. Every sentence was crafted with precision, suggesting rather than demanding, requesting clarification rather than ordering changes. She had learned that in royal communications, subtlety was far more effective than direct confrontation. As she typed, Camilla reflected on the irony of her situation. She had spent so many years fighting to be accepted by the public that she had perhaps forgotten how to navigate internal palace politics with the same finesse. Now, facing a challenge from within the family rather than from outside critics, she would need to employ all the strategic thinking that had brought her this far. The afternoon sun was beginning to cast long shadows across the study when she finally finished her correspondence. Tomorrow, she would begin implementing her carefully planned response to what she saw as a threat to the established order. She had no intention of allowing her hard-won position to be diminished, regardless of public opinion polls or social media metrics. Camilla locked her computer and gathered her personal items, preparing to return to London and the next phase of her royal duties. As she walked toward the door, she paused at the photograph of her coronation, touching the frame gently. That moment had represented the culmination of a journey that had cost her years of public scorn and personal sacrifice. She would not allow anyone, no matter how beloved or well-intentioned, to undermine what she had built. The fog was beginning to lift as her Bentley pulled away from Windsor Castle, but Camilla knew that clearer skies didn't necessarily mean smoother sailing ahead. The real storm was just beginning. Catherine, Princess of Wales, stood in the nursery of Adelaide Cottage, watching her youngest son Louis practice his reading while the autumn rain drummed against the windows. The cozy family home in Windsor Great Park felt worlds away from the formal grandeur of the working palaces, and these quiet moments with her children had become increasingly precious as her royal duties expanded. Her phone buzzed with yet another message from her private secretary, Hannah Morrison, who had been fielding an unusual number of requests and scheduling changes over the past week. Catherine glanced at the screen and frowned. 3 events she had been confirmed for had been suddenly postponed pending further review, and 2 patronage announcements that had been scheduled for the following month were now delayed indefinitely. "Mummy, why do you look worried?" Louis asked, looking up from his book with the perceptive eyes that seemed to run in the Wales family. At 6 years old, he had already developed an uncanny ability to read emotions, perhaps a survival skill learned in a household where public faces often masked private concerns. Catherine smiled and ruffled his hair, pushing aside her growing unease. "Just thinking about grown-up things, sweetheart. How's your story coming along?" As Louis returned to his reading, Catherine's mind wandered to the strange atmosphere she had noticed during her last few visits to Buckingham Palace. Conversations that stopped when she entered rooms, meetings that had been mysteriously rescheduled, and a general sense that something was shifting beneath the polished surface of royal protocol. The sound of William's car pulling into the driveway interrupted her thoughts. She could tell from the way he shut the door that his day had been challenging. As heir apparent, William faced constant pressure to balance his royal duties with his role as a father and husband, but lately, those pressures seemed to be intensifying. "How was your meeting with the Archbishop?" Catherine asked as William entered the nursery, loosening his tie with the relief of someone finally able to drop his public persona. William's expression was troubled as he bent to kiss Louis on the head. Interesting timing, actually. He wanted to discuss the historical precedents for queen consorts leading certain state functions. Apparently, there's been some concern raised about proper protocol being followed. Catherine felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October weather. "What kind of concerns?" "Nothing specific," William said, though his tone suggested there was more to the story. But he mentioned that Queen Camilla's office had reached out about reviewing the traditional roles during state visits. "You seem to think I should be aware of these discussions." They moved to the sitting room once Louis was settled with his books, and Catherine poured tea from the service that had become their evening ritual. The simple china and comfortable furniture created an atmosphere of normalcy that both of them cherished, especially during times when the complexities of royal life threatened to overwhelm their private happiness. "William, I've been getting some odd messages from Hannah," Catherine began, settling beside him on the sofa. "Several commitments have been suddenly postponed, and there seems to be some question about upcoming patronage announcements." William's jaw tightened as he absorbed this information. "What kind of postponements?" "The children's hospital visit next week was moved to accommodate scheduling conflicts, and the mental health summit where I was supposed to give the keynote address has been delayed pending further coordination with senior royal calendars." Catherine's voice carried a note of frustration that she rarely allowed herself to express. "Hannah says the explanations are vague, but they all seem to be coming from the Lord Chamberlain's office." William set down his teacup with more force than necessary. "This is exactly what I was afraid of." "What do you mean?" "Catherine, I think my stepmother is making a play to reassert her authority." William's words carried the weight of someone who had spent his entire life observing the subtle power dynamics within the royal family. "She's been queen consort for less than 2 years, but she's already feeling threatened by your popularity and the public's response to your work." Catherine had always been diplomatic about her relationship with Camilla, recognizing the older woman's difficult journey to acceptance and try to maintain family harmony. But she couldn't ignore the growing evidence that her position was being systematically undermined. "I've always been respectful of her role and position," Catherine said, though her voice betrayed her hurt. "I've never tried to overshadow anyone or step outside proper protocol." William moved closer to his wife, taking her hand in his. "That's exactly the problem, from her perspective. You don't have to try to outshine anyone, Catherine. It happens naturally because people genuinely connect with you. Your work with early childhood development, your advocacy for mental health, the way you interact with the public, it all comes across as authentic and caring. That's not something that can be manufactured or managed by a communications team." The compliment was sincere, but Catherine could hear the underlying concern in her husband's voice. In the royal family, being too popular could sometimes be as dangerous as being unpopular, especially if it threatened the carefully maintained hierarchy that kept the institution functioning. "So what do we do?" Catherine asked. "I can't pretend to be less engaged or enthusiastic about my work. These causes matter too much to me." William stood and began pacing the small room, his mind clearly working through the strategic implications of their situation. "We need to be smart about this. Camilla has experience and institutional knowledge on her side, but she's underestimating something crucial, which is the fact that the future of the monarchy depends on relevance and public support. My father may be king now, but I'll be king for potentially decades longer. The decisions we make about the crown's direction will outlast any short-term power struggles. William's voice carried the authority of someone who had been preparing for his role his entire life. And the public has made their preferences clear. They see you as representing the modern, accessible face of the monarchy. Catherine appreciated her husband's confidence, but she also understood the delicate position they were in. We can't appear to be disrespectful to your father or stepmother. That would damage the institution and our own credibility. Absolutely. Which is why we need to be strategic rather than reactive. William returned to the sofa, his expression now showing the calculated thinking that had been honed by years of royal training. I'm going to arrange a private meeting with my father. He needs to understand that any attempt to sideline you will ultimately harm the monarchy's long-term prospects. Catherine nodded, though she felt a familiar knot of anxiety forming in her stomach. Royal family disagreements were never simple personal matters. They had constitutional implications and public consequences that could reverberate for generations. What about the immediate issues? The canceled events and delayed announcements. Hannah should request specific explanations for every postponement and delay. If there are legitimate scheduling conflicts, that's one thing. But if this is about reassigning responsibilities based on some new interpretation of protocol, we need to address it directly. William's tone had shifted to the authoritative register he used during official duties. I also want her to prepare a detailed brief on your work over the past year. The events, the impact, the public response. We need documentation that shows how your role has evolved naturally based on public need and your expertise. Catherine felt some relief at having a concrete plan, but she couldn't shake her concern about the personal cost of this conflict. William, I never wanted to be in competition with anyone in your family. I just wanted to serve and support the causes I care about. I know, William said, pulling her closer. And that's exactly why you're so effective. The public can tell the difference between someone who's genuinely passionate about their work and someone who's simply fulfilling obligations. But we're dealing with institutional politics now, not just charitable work. As if summoned by their conversation, Catherine's phone rang with a call from Hannah Morrison. The private secretary's voice was tense as she delivered news that confirmed their worst fears. Your Royal Highness, I've just received word that your speech at the International Children's Conference has been canceled. The Lord Chamberlain's office says there are protocol considerations that need to be reviewed before any new international commitments can be confirmed. Catherine met William's eyes across the room, seeing her own frustration reflected in his expression. What kind of protocol considerations? She asked. They're being quite vague, ma'am. But they've suggested that all international speaking engagements by working royals need to be coordinated through the Queen Consort's office to ensure proper precedence and messaging consistency. After ending the call, Catherine and William sat in silence for several moments, processing the implications of this latest development. The Children's Conference had been months in planning, with Catherine's expertise in early childhood development being specifically requested by the organizing committee. This isn't about protocol, William said finally. This is about control. Catherine nodded, feeling a steely determination replacing her earlier anxiety. She had always prided herself on being a team player within the royal family, but she wouldn't allow her genuine advocacy work to be sacrificed for internal power games. Then, we need to make sure she understands that we won't be controlled, Catherine said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. I've worked too hard, and the causes I support are too important to be used as pawns in someone else's agenda. William smiled, recognizing the quiet strength that had first attracted him to his wife and had served her well throughout their years in the public eye. Now you're talking like a future queen. That evening, as they tucked their children into bed and settled into their own routine, both William and Catherine knew that their lives were about to become significantly more complicated. The gloves had been taken off, and what had started as subtle maneuvering was about to escalate into open conflict. But Catherine had something that Camilla had taken years to achieve, the genuine affection and trust of the British public. The question now was whether that would be enough to protect her from the machinations of palace politics. or whether she would need to learn to fight fire with fire. As she turned off the lights in Adelaide Cottage, Catherine made a mental note to call her own trusted advisors in the morning. If this was going to be a battle for the soul of the modern monarchy, she intended to be fully prepared for whatever came next. King Charles III stood in his private study at Clarence House, staring at the morning newspapers spread across his mahogany desk. The headlines told a story he had hoped to avoid. Royal rift emerges as palace events mysteriously cancelled, and Catherine's charity work facing protocol reviews from senior royals. The carefully orchestrated image of family unity that had taken months to establish was beginning to crack, and he knew exactly why. The intercom on his desk buzzed softly. "Your Majesty, the Prince of Wales has arrived for your meeting," announced his private secretary, Sir Clive Alderton, in a respectful but efficient tone that had made him indispensable during Charles's transition to the throne. "Send him in," Charles replied, steeling himself for what he suspected would be a difficult conversation. He had ruled for less than 2 years, and already he was facing the kind of internal family conflict that could destabilize everything he had worked his entire life to achieve. William entered the study with the bearing of someone who had important things to say and little patience for royal pleasantries. He had clearly chosen his approach carefully, dressed in a formal suit that reminded his father of their respective positions, while maintaining the familiarity of a son seeking guidance from his father. "Papa," William began, using the family name that always softened Charles's more formal instincts. "Thank you for making time to see me on such short notice." Charles gestured toward the comfortable chairs arranged near the fireplace, away from the formal desk setup that might make their conversation feel too official. "Of course, William. I suspect I know why you're here. Then you've heard about the obstacles that Catherine is suddenly facing with her charitable work." William's question was direct, but respectful, threading the needle between filial duty and protective husband. Charles sighed, a sound that carried the weight of a man who had spent decades navigating the complex relationships within his own family. "I've heard some concerns, yes. Your stepmother has raised questions about protocol and proper precedence during state functions. With respect, Papa, this isn't about state functions. Catherine's children's hospital visit and her mental health advocacy work have nothing to do with state protocol. These are charitable patronages that she's developed expertise in over more than a decade of royal service." William's voice remained calm, but Charles could detect the underlying steel that emerged when his son felt his family was threatened. The king moved to the window overlooking the gardens, where gardeners were preparing the flower beds for winter. The seasonal transition seemed to mirror the changes happening within his own household. "William, I understand your frustration, but I also need to consider Camilla's perspective. She's worked incredibly hard to establish her role as queen consort, and she's concerned that some boundaries may be getting blurred." "What boundaries?" William asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer wouldn't satisfy him. "Catherine has never overstepped her role or failed to show proper respect for precedents. Her popularity isn't the result of ambition or protocol violations. It's because she genuinely connects with people and works effectively for causes that matter." Charles turned back to face his son, recognizing in William's expression the same determined protectiveness that he himself had felt during his own struggles with family dynamics and public opinion. "I know Catherine's work is genuine and valuable. That's not in question." "Then what is in question?" The king sat down across from his son, choosing his words carefully. "Camilla feels that Catherine's increasing prominence in international forums and high-profile charitable work could potentially overshadow the traditional role of the queen consort. She's concerned about the long-term implications for royal hierarchy and public understanding of our respective positions." William leaned forward, his expression intense but controlled. "Papa, with respect to Camilla and everything she's accomplished, the public doesn't care about hierarchies based on marriage dates or traditional precedents. They care about results, authenticity, and relevance. Catherine delivers all three. That may be true, but we can't simply ignore constitutional traditions because of popularity polls," Charles replied, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced by his own argument. "I'm not suggesting we ignore tradition," William said. "I'm suggesting that we distinguish between meaningful traditions that serve the institution and arbitrary restrictions that limit our effectiveness." When Catherine speaks at international conferences about early childhood development, she's representing the best of what the modern monarchy can offer. When that work gets canceled because of protocol considerations, we're potentially damaging our own relevance and credibility. Charles stood and walked to his bookshelf, pulling out a leather-bound volume about royal protocol that had been annotated by generations of his predecessors. The monarchy has survived for 1,000 years because it maintains certain standards and structures, William. We can't simply abandon them whenever they become inconvenient. "I'm not talking about abandoning anything," William replied, his patience beginning to show strain. "I'm talking about preventing the unnecessary restriction of effective royal work because of personal insecurities." The words hung in the air between them, both men understanding that the conversation had just shifted to a more dangerous level. Charles set down the book and looked directly at his son. "That's a serious accusation, William." "It's an accurate assessment, Papa." Camilla's concerns aren't about constitutional propriety. They're about feeling threatened by Catherine's natural effectiveness in her royal role. William's voice remained respectful, but his words were uncompromising. "And I won't stand by while my wife's genuine charitable work is undermined because someone feels their position is being challenged." Charles felt the familiar tension that arose whenever his roles as king, husband, and father came into conflict with each other. He loved Camilla deeply and respected her dedication to royal service, but he also understood William's protective instincts and recognized the validity of his concerns about institutional effectiveness. "What do you propose we do?" Charles asked, though the question felt like an admission that the situation had moved beyond his control. "I propose that we establish clear guidelines for royal charitable work based on expertise and effectiveness rather than arbitrary hierarchies," William said. "Catherine has proven herself as an advocate for mental health and early childhood development. Those shouldn't be subject to approval from anyone who doesn't share her expertise in those areas. And if Camilla disagrees with that approach," William's expression hardened slightly, "then we'll need to have a conversation about what's best for the long-term health of the monarchy versus what makes certain individuals comfortable in the short term." Charles recognized the implicit threat in his son's words. William was prepared to escalate this conflict if necessary, and as heir apparent, he had significant leverage in any internal palace dispute. The king also knew that public opinion would likely support William and Catherine in any open disagreement, which could potentially damage Camilla's carefully rebuilt reputation. "Let me speak with Camilla," Charles said finally. "Perhaps we can find a solution that addresses her concerns while allowing Catherine's work to continue unimpeded. With respect, Papa, speaking with her isn't enough at this point. The damage is already being done to Catherine's scheduled commitments and plan initiatives. We need concrete action to restore what's been canceled and ensure this doesn't happen again." Charles nodded slowly, understanding that his son was asking for more than just a family discussion. "What specifically do you want reinstated?" William pulled out his phone, consulting notes he had clearly prepared in advance. The children's hospital visit that was postponed, the International Children's Conference speech that was canceled, and the 2 patronage announcements that were delayed. Additionally, we need assurance that Catherine's future charitable commitments won't be subject to arbitrary review by anyone who doesn't have relevant expertise in those areas. "That's quite a list of demands, William." "They're not demands, Papa. They're reasonable requests for the restoration of canceled legitimate royal work." William's tone remained steady, but Charles could see the determination in his eyes. Catherine isn't asking for anything beyond what she's already proven capable of handling effectively. The king stood and moved to his desk, pulling out a leather appointment book. "I'll arrange a meeting with Camilla, the Lord Chamberlain, and the Archbishop to discuss appropriate protocols for charitable work assignments. But, William, I need your assurance that this conversation stays between us until we can resolve it properly." "Of course," William replied. "But I also need your assurance that Catherine's work won't be further disrupted while we're having these discussions. You have it, Charles said, though both men understood that such assurances were easier to give than to enforce within the complex dynamics of royal household management. As William prepared to leave, Charles felt compelled to address the larger implications of their conversation. Son, I hope you understand that family harmony is crucial to the stability of the institution. We can't afford to have public disagreements or visible divisions. I completely agree, William replied, which is why it's so important that we resolve this quickly and fairly. Catherine has never sought conflict with anyone in the family. She simply tried to serve effectively in her role. If that's being perceived as threatening, then we have a problem that goes beyond individual personalities. After William left, Charles sat alone in his study, contemplating the impossible balance he was expected to maintain between personal relationships and institutional responsibilities. He had spent his entire life preparing to be king, but nothing had quite prepared him for mediating conflicts between the two women he loved most in his life. He reached for his phone to call Camilla, knowing that the conversation would be even more difficult than the one he had just concluded with William. The queen consort would not appreciate being asked to step back from what she saw as her legitimate concerns about protocol and precedence. But Charles also understood that William's implicit message was clear. The future king would not accept any actions that diminished his wife's role or effectiveness. The stakes of this family disagreement had just become significantly higher, and the king would need to choose between supporting his wife's position or ensuring his son's cooperation. As he dialed Camilla's number, Charles reflected on the irony that his greatest challenge as monarch might not come from external political pressures or public criticism, but from managing the competing ambitions and insecurities within his own family. The crown that he had waited 7 decades to wear was proving to be heavier than he had ever imagined. Queen Camilla stood at the window of her sitting room at Clarence House, watching the London traffic crawl past in the early November drizzle. The phone call from Charles had ended 20 minutes ago, but she was still processing the implications of their conversation. Her husband, the king, had essentially asked her to step back from what she saw as legitimate concerns about royal protocol and hierarchy. The request had been gentle but firm, wrapped in diplomatic language about family harmony and institutional effectiveness. She moved away from the window and settled into her favorite chair, surrounded by the personal touches that had taken years to feel truly comfortable displaying in royal residences. The photographs, books, and artwork told the story of a woman who had fought for every inch of acceptance and respect she had achieved. Now it seemed she was being asked to voluntarily surrender some of that hard-won ground. Her private secretary, Sir Reginald Hartwell, knocked softly on the door before entering. His expression was carefully neutral, but Camilla had worked with him long enough to recognize the signs of concern behind his diplomatic facade. "Your Majesty," he began, settling into the chair across from her with a leather portfolio in hand. "I've prepared the briefing you requested about historical precedents for queen consorts maintaining protocol authority during succession periods." Camilla accepted the documents, but didn't immediately open them. "Before we discuss precedents, Reginald, I need to understand something. In your professional opinion, am I being unreasonable in my concerns about proper protocol?" The question put her private secretary in a difficult position, and he took a moment to consider his response carefully. "Ma'am, your concerns about maintaining traditional hierarchies are certainly legitimate from a constitutional perspective. However, the practical reality is that the Princess of Wales has developed genuine expertise and public support in her charitable areas that would be difficult to restrict without appearing arbitrary." "Arbitrary," Camilla repeated, her voice carrying a note of frustration. "Is it arbitrary to expect that senior royals should have input into how charitable work is coordinated and presented internationally?" "Not at all, Your Majesty. But the challenge is that the princess's work has evolved organically based on her genuine interests and proven effectiveness. Attempting to impose new restrictions now could appear reactive rather than procedural." Camilla opened the portfolio and scanned the historical examples Reginald had compiled, Queen Mary's management of charitable precedents, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother's coordination of wartime activities, and other examples of queen consorts successfully maintaining their authority even as other family members gain prominence. These examples show that it can be done, she said, pointing to a particular section about Queen Mary's approach to managing charitable patronages during her son King George V's reign. She maintained clear authority over charitable coordination without stifling other family members' contributions. Yes, ma'am, but the media landscape and public expectations were quite different then, Reginald replied diplomatically. Today's public tends to focus more on results and personal connection than on traditional hierarchies. They're more likely to support initiatives that appear to be making a genuine impact than those that follow proper precedents. Camilla set down the documents and looked directly at her private secretary. Are you suggesting that I abandon my legitimate concerns about protocol in order to accommodate popular opinion? Not at all, Your Majesty. I'm suggesting that we might need to find a more subtle approach that achieves your goals while avoiding the appearance of restricting popular initiatives. Reginald leaned forward slightly, his tone becoming more confidential. Perhaps instead of limiting the princess's current work, we could focus on expanding your own profile in complementary areas. The suggestion intrigued Camilla, despite her frustration. What do you mean? Your work with literacy programs and support for victims of domestic violence has been highly effective, but perhaps underreported. We could develop a more robust communication strategy that highlights your unique contributions while allowing the princess's work to continue. Rather than direct competition, we could position your respective roles as complementary aspects of a comprehensive royal charitable approach. Camilla considered this perspective, though part of her bristled at the idea of essentially conceding the high-profile international platform to Catherine. That assumes I'm willing to accept a secondary role in charitable leadership. With respect, ma'am, it assumes you're willing to prioritize the long-term stability of the institution over short-term concerns about precedence. Reginald's words were carefully chosen, but direct. The Prince of Wales made it quite clear during his meeting with the king that he won't accept any actions that diminish his wife's effectiveness. Given his position as heir apparent, that's a significant factor to consider. The reminder of William's leverage in this situation only increased Camilla's frustration. She had spent decades earning her place in the royal family, only to find herself in a position where her stepson could essentially dictate terms because of his future role and his wife's popularity. What exactly did the prince say to the king? She asked, though she suspected the answer would only deepen her concerns. Reginald consulted his notes, which included information from various palace sources who had become aware of the growing tension. According to our understanding, he made it clear that he considers the recent restrictions on the princess's work to be unacceptable and potentially damaging to the monarchy's long-term effectiveness. He also requested specific reinstatement of canceled commitments. And the king's response? His Majesty appears to be prioritizing family unity and institutional stability. He's scheduled meetings with all relevant parties to find a resolution, but the implication seems to be that the princess's work should continue without further interference. Camilla stood and moved to her desk, where a computer screen showed the latest social media engagement numbers for various royal activities. Catherine's recent hospital visit had generated over 1 million positive interactions across platforms, while Camilla's own charitable events, though well-received, drew significantly less online attention. The numbers don't lie, she said, more to herself than to Reginald. The public has made their preferences clear. Her private secretary approached the desk, his expression sympathetic. Your Majesty, public approval numbers don't diminish the constitutional importance of your role or the value of your contributions. The Queen Consort position carries weight and authority that transcends social media metrics. But in practical terms, if the king is asking me to step back from protocol concerns and the heir apparent is defending his wife's independence, what authority do I actually have? The question revealed the heart of Camilla's frustration, the gap between theoretical royal hierarchy and practical palace politics. You have the authority that comes with experience, institutional knowledge, and the king's trust, Reginald replied. Perhaps the question isn't how to restrict others' roles, but how to leverage your unique position more effectively. Camilla returned to her chair, considering this perspective. What would that look like in practical terms? Instead of positioning yourself as the coordinator of all royal charitable work, you could become a senior advisor who helps optimize how different family members' efforts complement each other. Rather than restricting the princess's international speaking engagements, you could provide guidance on how those appearances serve broader royal objectives. The suggestion had merit, though it required a significant shift in how Camilla viewed her role. Instead of being the primary decision-maker about charitable precedents, she would become more of a strategic consultant, using her experience to enhance rather than control other family members' work. That would require the princess to accept my guidance and input, Camilla pointed out. Given the current tension, that might be optimistic. Actually, ma'am, our sources suggest that the princess has always been open to guidance and coordination. The issues arose when guidance became restriction and coordination became control. Reginald's words carried a gentle but clear implication about what had gone wrong with the recent approach. Camilla felt a moment of clarity about the situation she had created. In her concern about maintaining authority, she had perhaps overreached in ways that appeared more controlling than coordinating. The distinction between leadership and dominance had become blurred in her efforts to assert her position. "What do you recommend as next steps?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the direction this conversation was heading. "I recommend that you request a direct meeting with the Princess of Wales, not through intermediaries or official channels, but a private conversation where you can address this situation personally and find a way forward that respects both your authority and her effectiveness." The suggestion made Camilla slightly uncomfortable, primarily because it required admitting that her recent actions might have been misguided. But it also offered an opportunity to reset the relationship on terms that could work for both women. And if she's unwilling to meet or accommodate my concerns, "Ma'am, from everything we know about the princess, she's consistently shown respect for family relationships and institutional stability. If you approach her with genuine interest in collaboration rather than control, she's likely to respond positively." Reginald paused. "The risk is in maintaining the current approach, which seems to be escalating rather than resolving the underlying tensions." Camilla looked out the window again, watching the afternoon light fade over London. The city below carried on with its daily business, largely unaware of the royal drama playing out in the elegant rooms above. But she knew that palace conflicts had a way of spilling into public view, and the monarchy's credibility could be damaged by perceptions of internal discord. "Arrange the meeting," she said finally, "but I want it to be genuinely private. No staff, no official records, just the two of us talking as family members." "Of course, Your Majesty. What message would you like me to convey when requesting the meeting?" Camilla considered her words carefully, knowing that the tone of the invitation would set the stage for what followed. "Tell her that I'd like to discuss how we can better coordinate our charitable work to maximize its impact while respecting royal protocols. And, Reginald, make it clear that I'm seeking collaboration, not offering criticism." After her private secretary left to arrange the meeting, Camilla remained in her sitting room, reflecting on how quickly a desire to assert authority had evolved into a full-scale family conflict. She had learned through hard experience that in royal politics, perception often mattered more than intention, and her recent actions had clearly been perceived as threatening rather than organizing. The Queen Consort pulled out her personal phone and scrolled through recent news coverage of Catherine's charitable work. The photos showed a woman genuinely engaged with her causes, comfortable with public interaction, and clearly effective at representing royal values to a modern audience. It was exactly the kind of authentic royal service that the institution needed to remain relevant. Perhaps, Camilla thought, the real question wasn't how to control or coordinate that effectiveness, but how to ensure that her own contributions were equally valued and visible. The monarchy was large enough for multiple successful working royals, as long as they could find ways to complement rather than compete with each other. As she prepared for what would undoubtedly be one of the most important conversations of her royal career, Camilla felt both nervous and hopeful. The meeting with Catherine would either resolve their differences and establish a new foundation for collaboration, or it would make their conflict impossible to contain within private family channels. The stakes couldn't be higher for both women or for the institution they served.